is a reading of Even the Good Girls Will Cry by Maur. I'm reading this for the blind from a YouTube channel. Okay. Turn of a millennium rarely happens in a lifetime. This is a story about the decade that defined me and my generation. (1991 to 2001). I would never wish for another time to come into my womanhood. Through the Looking Glass. Reading, UK, August 1994. Where's my spray paint? The flimsy door to main stage dressing room in 5 flung open to Courtney roared her demand out into the massive festival grounds. The sound of 65,000 fans and distant drums floated into the mobile trailer for a moment before she slammed the door behind her. Then the inaudible vocals and muffled bass lines boomed through the thin walls again. Inside her band's backstage trailer was total chaos. Silk slips, fishnet stockings, satin high-heeled shoes, and brightly colored plastic baby girl hair breaths exploded out of open suitcases. The catering table was covered with chips, veggie sticks, candy, and cold cuts, stabbed with cigarette butts and littered with dozens of Courtney's makeup bottles in cases. A Marshall guitar amplifier lay on its back in the center of the room. It looked like it had passed out and was waiting to be revived. Courtney Love, fearless frontwoman of the band Hole, and my new boss, paced around the amp, eyeing it like prey. She was wearing only a white lace bra and black fitness stockings with no underwear. A big messy heart had been drawn on her abdomen with a black Sharpie. She was waiting for the tools she needed to arrive so she could leave her next mark. It was late Friday afternoon, August 26, 1994, the first day of the Reading Festival, the United Kingdom's largest and the world's oldest existing popular music festival. The rural takeover that is reading is testament to the United Kingdom's leadership in summer music festivals. Multiple stages and dozens of tents and vendor villages covered the 190 acres. The warm summer air created an idyllic rural field environment for alternative rock fans to roam freely and explore themselves and the sounds of the day. The traveling circus made up of alternative musicians was hosted in the backstage area, which looks like Trailer Park Chick on steroids. Over 3 days, 200 bands needed to eat, drink, change outfits, shower, get drunk, do drugs, discuss their set lists, and find places to pee. Our band, Hole, was scheduled to play midway into the lineup that day, a few slots after the Flaming Lips and the Verve immediately before Pavement. Pavement was rising up the ranks of 90s alternative stature with their new album, Crooked Rain. Crooked Rain is an epitome of our scene's fuck fame, folk rock star ethos. Prior to this, Hole had been playing clubs, so the high-ranking position on the main stage of the biggest music festival in the world was about to have a major impact on the professional advancement of the band. Sorry they sent a runner into town for it. Just got it. Joe Mama Nitzberg, Courtney's oldest friend from her teen goth years in San Francisco, burst into the trailer holding up a can of spray paint like a trophy. He was wearing a little kid's black cowboy hat and red and black plaid shirt and vintage Levi jeans. Ironic. I am an American style. Joe was a quick-humored, adorable, flamboyant man who beamed with love. He was here on this trip across the Atlantic to metaphorically hold Courtney's hand while for her first public performance since her husband, Nirvana's frontman Kurt Cobain, died by suicide 4 months earlier in their Seattle home. Live Through This, Hole's first album on major label Geffen Records, had been released on April 12, 1994. Only a few weeks after Kurt's suicide, the date had been scheduled months prior. But the entanglement of this album and Courtney's new status as Kurt's widow was so messy and the connections were so blurry. Courtney's famous band's suicide wholly overshadowed her album's release. As tragic as his death was, that obnoxious symbol of male dominance was not lost on me, even then. Courtney put on tattered white slip, shook the can, and knelt in front of the amp with the lit cigarette firmly locked in her mouth. Smoke was ever present around her, making her look like a smoking dragon. Joe carefully held back her messy bleached blonde hair from behind, like a dear friend would when you're vomiting into a toilet to keep it from catching on fire. Joe took his caretaking of Courtney in a tongue-in-cheek but serious way. He was clearly tapped into her wildness, and their bond was beautiful. Being around the two of them gave me my first glimpse into Courtney's softer, more personable and sensitive side, one that keeps friends for life. The spray paint fumes filled the trailer as a giant, childlike pink heart took shape on the amp. Then Courtney sprayed a huge, dramatic X on top of it. Patty Schmel, Hole's drummer, took a break from her warm-ups to film the scene with the new dad, tourist-worthy handyman she'd invested in to capture this trip overseas. She was wearing a dark blue t-shirt with a 5-point white star positioned directly over each nipple. Patty's quick humor was and warm presence grounded the space. I'd already come to rely on this just 1 week into this adventure with the band. Eric Erlandson, Hole's co-founder and guitar player, and the only male in the band, was nowhere to be seen. He'd likely found a quiet place either to make out with his new love, Hollywood starlet Drew Barrymore, or to meditate before the show. 15 minutes before showtime, Craig Montgomery, our store manager, popped his peppy blonde bob head into the trailer. His eyes locked on the newly improved guitar amplifier. We gotta get this amp back on stage. With a grunt, Courtney pulled herself off the amp and then off the floor with the help of Joe. She snarled and seemed pleased with her pink invention and on the classic rock and roll intervention. I turned to the small mirror in the room. My familiar makeup-free, laissez-faire, freckled face was framed by frizzy, curly red hair. I didn't feel the need to adjust anything, only to apply the same brownie manure mauve mate MAC lipstick to my lips. This was my only special touch to prepare myself to play a concert in front of 65,000 people. A cultural mood of the moment was a cult of not trying, of effortless happening, even when something major like this was happening. My outfit said it all. I was wearing my staple of any other day back home at University in Montreal. A navel-revealing 1970s vintage polyester children's t-shirt featuring an iconic cartoon of two wholesome little wide-eyed girls holding hands in the snow, a brown suede miniskirt, and scuffed-up combat boots. I know now how much was riding on this day, but at the time, my 22-year-old mind was barely contemplating the enormity of it all. This was only the 7th live rock concert that I've ever performed in my life, and the first outside of Montreal clubs. I had joined the band only 2 weeks earlier and learned the set list over the course of a week's rehearsal in Seattle. I felt like an absurd grunge Cinderella who'd found herself with VIP access to the ball. To some back home, my joining Hole was the epitome of a dream. To others, it was the biggest sellout of our scene. I had been trained to not hunt for this, to not give a fuck about success. I was lockstep in line with the indie ethos of the early 90s to not sell out. Success was weighed with guilt and shame. It felt like our self-worth was always at stake. Very confusing times for an aspiring and struggling artist. The tension and inner conflict were real, but at the same time my eyes had been wide open. I had been paying attention to the signs that led me here. I didn't choose to join Hole, it chose me. As I stood in front of the mirror, I felt calm, resting in a sense of destiny and duty. I was replacing Kristen Pliff, the previous bass player who died of a heroin overdose just 10 weeks prior. There were so many layers of tragic romance, addiction, visceral creativity, success, and aspiration swarming around this clan. Kurt's and Kristen's deaths were global news. The omnipresent sense of rock and roll saga of mythology proportions unfolding in real time, starring in the most significant voices of my generation, was very heavy and present. Fans around the world were moved and enthralled by it all. But while I was applying my lipstick in the eye of the actual storm, the radical emotional landscape of my new band members overshadowed the major rock history and the making aspect of what I had just stepped into. Joining a band that had just suffered 2 major deaths created an intensity that made me feel I had to honor both the living and the dead and push my own feelings and experiences to the background. All I was tuned into was my band members' complex feelings and loss and pain in the chords and arrangements of the songs I had memorized. I had yet to experience a significant death in my life, but I've come to understand that, like all who live in the wake of death, my new band members were in shock. And the shock and the ripple effects of the enormous double loss were in direct conflict with making and releasing an amazing, already critically acclaimed album. It would be nearly impossible for even the most well-adjusted, stable adult to integrate the two, let alone a band of, for the most part, parentless drug addicts living out their tragedies in public. Okay. A decade later, Janessa Williams in The Guardian would describe Hull's performance at the Reading Festival as the beginning of a world tour of chaos and drugs. It was beyond true. The level of dysfunction and destruction that followed. Courtney was not okay. She was grieving. She had a young daughter to raise, and she was on drugs. On top of that, she was the most famous widow of the most famous dead rock star in the world. She was a raging, rolling tornado. But wow, did she put on an enthralling show. No one could scream like her, throw herself into the crowd like that, or look the audience directly in the eye so fearlessly. The performances were her catharsis, and we were all her witnesses. A local stagehand stepped into the trailer with Craig to move the amp. His gaze landed on the blonde surrounded by a halo of smoke. His starstruck shock was palpable. This kind of gawking in our band's presence would become the norm for years to come. No matter what room, airplane, or street she occupied, Courtney rarely went unnoticed. People became transfixed. I would soon learn to cancel out their voyeuristic gazes and pretend they weren't there. I discovered how to do this as a child, growing up in the shadow of a larger-than-life father, a prominent broadcaster, journalist, and politician who ran out his life of downtown Montreal bars. Outside gazes followed him everywhere he went, and because I was his daughter, his often public sidekick, and a frequent topic of his newspaper columns, that meant they'd follow me too. The love he showed me in public collapsed our private and public lives into one. From a very early age, I became accustomed to the public gaze, and I'm comfortable with that kind of love. Maybe that's how I can be getting ready to step on a stage in front of thousands and not feel even a blip of nervousness. It's unusual, I know. As a teenager, I worked as a ticket girl in a punk rock club in Montreal and as a cassette DJ in a dive bar. These places, as well as my father's scene in the bars of my youth, all had a similar energy to rock shows and festivals. Despite the rowdy voices, loud music, and celebratory atmosphere, I grew accustomed to the underlying sadness and loneliness in the people who gathered there. They seemed to flock to each other, and when they came together, seemed both lost and found at the same time. I think that all of this gave me the ability to step into the fame game and not be fucked. It was the same equation, just on a larger scale. The formative years gave me a lot of practice fitting into chaotic scenes. My innate shyness, I know, may have come off as aloof. I was more comfortable on the sidelines as an observer, next to the heart of the action. The periphery was my happy place to be. When things got weird or chaotic in these environments, I could feel myself transported like in a psychedelic trip, having a sort of out-of-body experience as if I were floating above the chaos. I could watch it, hold it, even admire it, while keeping a distance and letting it wash over me. This is what helps me stay calm in the eye of the storm. The drama and chaos of Courtney Love and Hull are infamous, but to me it all felt familiar. I found comfort in the chaos. My upbringing was the perfect training ground to be in a rock band and immersed in a world of Courtney. Despite how new I was to the band, I fit right in.